I was the CIO, or I am the CIO of a medical practice that deals with ophthalmology, and there are sorts of limits, operating limits of our senses. Our vision is actually more of a process of our brain. I think as Dr. Paul Bacharita had mentioned, we see with our brain, not with our eyes. Have you seen those same limits? And I think we have biological range effects as well, right?
That's right.
That we have that small little sliver of our perception of reality. We can't see or can't perceive reality completely. We can't look at all the colors, the different light spectrums and whatnot, but we get a sliver. Is that basically because it was more advantageous for us to survive just to see the things that were relevant for us, as opposed to perceive the entire, or was it just something that it was just too expensive for us to perceive all of the ranges of our hearing and our vision and our touch?
Well, a part of what you're saying are biological limits. One way people thought about our senses, really more in the middle of the 20th century, is very much the idea of channel capacity. So these are like any other channel where it's information going on a wire, for example, that there's some bandwidth to it. And you can only carry so much information in any one of our sensory systems. And so that's probably literally true. It almost, in fact, definitionally has to be true. You can't perceive everything. But what's even more striking is among the things that are being processed by your sensory systems, the vast majority of the information is simply ignored, or it has very little effects. So right now in this room, if you look around the room, there's all kinds of amazing detail, even in the curtains behind us. That detail is not relevant for your immediate actions. So when you, except the fact I pointed attention to it, neither of us would have noticed anything about the curtains once we left the room. And that's true in a lot of circumstances. In fact, there's an evocative phrase in an old perceptual researcher used that said the world is an external memory. And if you think about it, you don't really need to track the world around you. In fact, every time you blink your eyes, the world disappears and reappears. But it's not like whenever you open your eyes again, the world is just magically a new place. You assume that the world stays stable from moment to moment, and you really only pay attention to changes. So that sort of simplification is something our sensory systems do. They are, in fact, getting information about the entire world around us, but most of that information isn't relevant for behavior and is basically being ignored. So one of the interesting features of a lot of the applications of psychology and marketing and other places is that you have to overcome that bias. We want to get people's attention. What we mean by that is not for them to physically see it, and not for some abstract sense of I want them to know it and remember it. It's more concrete than that. I want them to recognize that the world is acting in an unexpected way, and that's what focuses my attention. The information was getting in some sense, but it wasn't leading to it wasn't changing memory, it wasn't changing behavior. And so that is a bias in the sense that we're set up in a way to only use some of the information that we perceive and not all of it. But it's something that we have control over, and others who manipulate our environments, what we see on TV, the rooms we enter, and so forth, they can control that as well.
So if we were to look at it, to summarize, I guess our perception of the world is optimized for usefulness as opposed to accuracy.
Yeah, absolutely true. We have very little, in fact, insight into the actual world around us. It seems like a crazy thing to say in some ways, but one examples I use when talking about this is actually just raw brightness. And right now we're in an interior room. It's lit by artificial lighting, and subjectively, if you had to, actually, I'll ask you this: if we were on a scale from 0 being the darkest room you've ever been in, darkest place you've ever been, let's say, and 100 being the brightest outdoor beach scene you've ever been in, what would this room be right now?
I'd say 50.
Okay.
50%.
People always say 30 to 50. No matter what room it is, they always say that. In reality, this room is probably even with the lights coming on us, this room is probably like 0.001. Wow. Meaning this is something like 1/10,000th or 100,000th, somewhere in that range, of the brightest place that you and I have ever been in. And the reason why is because bright daylight and dark starlight are not just a little bit different. They're different by about a factor of 1 billion. Meaning in the brightest place you've ever been in, the darkest place you've ever been, there's about 1 billion times more photons hitting each little part of your eye at the same time. Now that's like insane. Because like why would you have such Why would you not experience the world as being really a billion times brighter? Well, of course, the reason why is because objects and people and all the things out in the world are what's important. The absolute light level is not important. So within a very, very large range of daylight, even a factor of a millionfold difference between a cloudy day and a super bright day, you don't need to know the absolute level, so it gets filtered. Instead, you need to know the relative levels between all the people and objects and things in the world so you can deal with them. So the visual system is just one example, but it's very, very good at getting rid of things that are extraneous to our behavior and leaving the critical information, like whether, in fact, there's not how bright that person is in the sense of how reflective they are, but whether there is a person standing there. So it throws away the absolute levels that get in the way and keeps only the relative.
So if that's the way our body actually works, and those same range effects apparently are the same mechanisms behind our decision making, could we take some lessons from that and apply it to the way we present information? That maybe perhaps we shouldn't present all this data up front, that maybe what we should do is present the conclusion or the observation and then provide the data if it's helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that strike to me, that follow from what I'm saying. Again, they're metaphorical in the sense that it's not literally what happens from the bright example I've talked about, but it's the same deeper principles that apply in a variety of settings, from basic perception to memory to decision making. So one is what you said. We might call this like scaffolding. That what I want to do is establish expectations in my audience, and then I want to fill in those expectations. I think it's a wonderful technique because it really connects what we know about memory. If you do it right, each little thing you fill in can be a surprise. And people never lose track of what they're using the information for. So if you say, I'm going to make up an example, but it's the sort of thing that I might do in my own work. Well, I'm going to tell you how you can make better retirement decisions. To many audiences, that's a pretty powerful statement. And then I may tell them about their risk biases, I will tell them about their temporal choice biases, and I will tell them about their social biases. So they know I'm going to talk about three things, I know what the goal is, and so forth. Now that seems straightforward, right? That I'm just going to give people some organization. Is that all you're saying? Well, but if the organization is in service of a goal, then it turns out to be an extraordinarily effective way of giving a talk. It may not be the best way to show how brilliant I am or how creative I am in the talk, but it might be the best way to help them reach their goals of learning something from that talk.
So that organizational, that structure, can help us actually retain that information over a longer period of time. And I think Dr. Murali Duraswamy in DIBS, at the Duke Institute of Brain Sciences, seems to concur with that, or at least what I understand.
So I think there's a couple of things. So if we think about what's most relevant for memory, so they're using the memory for something. One example, and this is one researcher's view, but it's a very evocative view. One researcher has made the argument the single best way to remember some object, if I just showed you a picture of an object, say a screwdriver, and say, I want you to remember that object for a while, would be for you to imagine the following story. You have been trapped on a desert island. You open your bag and there's a screwdriver in it. How are you going to use it to survive on that desert island? And you can come up with some story. I'm going to grab the screwdriver, I'm going to pry open coconuts, then I'm going to use it as a fishing line bait, or weight on my fishing line, and then I'm going to use it to construct my shelter. All those uses for the object embedded in a very rich network of associations and make it very easy to remember. And that principle generally holds that the more you can think about using material, that it's for a purpose, the better it is remembered. That's related to a second idea, which is that often, again, if something is unsurprising, then what you're basically saying is that information that was just given to me is not useful. It fits with what I already knew. So why should I waste my precious resources on that? Let's find something out that is useful and novel. And so I think it's often effective to make sure people's intuitions are developed at the first part of a talk, so that they may have let me say it this way. There may be several different competing intuitions. At the beginning of the talk, make sure one of those is well developed, so that they focus on that and they have that well established and everything seems reasonable. Then change that so that now you show that why their original intuition might be wrong. And then the rest of their talk, they're trying to figure out what they should be replacing it with. So you're stabilizing something, giving them surprise, and giving them a goal to work toward. I think those sort of structures are very, very effective at talks and fit what we know about memory.
And clearly, in the great courses, you employ that technique very often to give us a paradigm that we would all yes, absolutely, and then say, well, this is an alternative view on that breaks that paradigm, and you're like, okay, wait a second.
Right.
Now I have to resolve what changed and why.
Right.
And is that a technique that you've seen widely used?
Well, I think it's very common. I mean, of course, there's no magic here. I mean, almost any technique is going to be used by a number of people, and convergent evolution implies that people many different people from different fields are going to sort of lock in on the same techniques. To be clear on what I think is the more and less effective ways of doing the same thing. I can either, if two things are possible, and I want to show you that the truth is B and not A, I could either present A, present B, and then tell you why B is better than A, or I can present A, tell you why A might be right, really emphasize that, and then show you why A might be wrong, and why everything you thought was wrong, and now B is really the truth for the world. That latter is going to be massively better remembered.
That's huge.
So it's the same concept. I might even be contrasting exactly the same things, but there are better and worse ways of presenting it.